Now, John, you tell me where I should be standing or not standing.
Yeah, that's good.
That's
Anyway,
good.
just not further that way.
Not further that way. So we are streaming this after John put out to everyone going, if you do not practice UX, do not come. And we have seats. Anyway, today what we're going to be doing, actually firstly I want to thank GA because they have given us the room at fairly short notice. So thanks to GA. I'll send a big email to them thanking Emma for doing that.
Sorry, you said you were streaming this, so I don't have
Yes, yes. And I've put the slides up on SlideShare as well. So today, I think I spent most of last year actually teaching at General Assembly, teaching the UXDI course. And so this coming back here feels like home. I know how to do all the technology, everything here. And also, this is one of my natural positions, which is teaching. So hopefully today you'll enjoy it. And indifferently to many of these meetups, we're going to be doing some exercises and activities and stuff like that as well, because I can't help myself. So today what we're going to do is talk about UX maturity and how you develop your UX practice in your organisation. So quick intro to me. This is new for me, the way I've presented myself, so let me try this. I am a UX management and leadership coach. I teach and support UX professionals at all levels, and so hopefully in the next couple of months you'll be seeing some of the things that I'm going to be putting forward when it comes to developing midweights to seniors. And I bring my expertise of over 20 years. So I started doing this stuff in 1995 when no one else was doing it, and we didn't know and we made it up. I know we still make it up, but we were making it up really from scratch at that point in time. And I've done this in a number of places. So I've been back in Australia for coming up 2 years now, and still trying to just find my place and understand where we are when it comes to UX in Melbourne. So what I want to do is set the scene. In particular, what I'm interested in, or what I want to talk about today, is about the strategic impact of UX within an organisation. So what do I mean by strategic impact? A lot of us spend our time sitting here just trying to work out what impact we're going to make. Or actually, most of the time we're sitting there going, how can I get the project done that I need to get done for my boss not to shout at me? Or how do I find enough people so that I can actually do the next project? Or how do I build up this person so that they're capable of leading a project? Or how can I get the team to work better together so that we don't have to replicate the same thing over and over again? But that's not impact for an organisation. Impact for an organisation goes down to, is it impact on bottom line, better customer service, them buying more, reducing costs? Sometimes it's clicks. So when we talk about strategic impact of UX, it comes down to the aspects of actually, are we making an impact on what we're doing, or are we, as someone said, just bringing it to the table? All we do is a baseline of UX where we get a big tick at the end of it which says it got tested and it was okay. So the thing about these maturity models is the aim for us to move from that we know nothing to, or we do nothing in the organisation, to having a great strategic impact. So one of the things I wanted to bring up was Leah Bewley. Now, does everyone know Leah? Leah used to work for Adaptive Path, and she was working previously for Forrester. She spent a year at Forrester, 2 years at Forrester, doing analysis of UX teams and methods. And she's gone out on her own now. And while she was at Forrester, she did a survey of UX professionals, and she's continued this on while she's been going into her own business. And this year she did this with, I think it was over 200, close to 300 UX professionals on what the impact or their impact of UX is in their organisations. And the way she did she got them to mark themselves off from 1 to 5, 1 being low impact, 5 being high impact. And these are the properties of what the difference is between people who organisations have low impact versus high impact. So, place in the organisation. People who have lower impact are either in product, which is low, IT, which is lower, and marketing, which is lowest. So if you find yourself in one of these, this is one of the aspects for you to sit there and say, okay, is this the right place for this organisation? And we'll have that discussion with someone in here has just said, I'm in IT. Okay. The highest impact is actually customer experience. Now that's not a surprise because of course user experience, customer experience can be used interchangeably, just depending on where you're thinking about. But the aim for that is to think about the customer as the highest, and UX fits so naturally as part of or as the discipline itself. The second one is the ratio of developers to designers. If you're in a 1 to 20, so 1 UX designer versus 20, your impact is low. Not a surprise. 1 to 4 is the better. Organisations with higher impact have a 1 to 4. Most of the organisations I've ever worked with, when I'm working in a dev organisation, we're sort of in between those numbers. I don't think I've ever been someplace where it was 1 to 4. Now, leadership roles. If you're in a lower impact, it tends to be a UX manager or below. If you're higher, it's usually a UX director or above. So a VP, a head of. Head of is hard to know what we call that one if it's in between those. Maybe a head of. But those are the sorts of things. So it's where you are in, or where the leadership is within your organisation. There is the process. So lower organisations with lower tend to be doing the basics. And I think that's where we're talking about people are just moving. Actually, you have to do the basics. Sometimes you just have to get the basis there. And we'll talk about that later today. But those with a higher impact are actually framing the solution rather than just sitting there and actually doing the wireframes. And then there's the measurement of UX impact. So, are we actually not measuring it? And one quote from her study was, we basically get it out, we don't even have time to do usability testing. That's not UX. But it's the pressure that a lot of people are under to actually just churn it out. Versus the higher impact, where they're actually sitting there and doing a quantified baseline against customer satisfaction or changes connected to revenue. So I've put these slides up onto SlideShare, and John's going to put out the link to the Meetup group. So and everything has the links for all of the places that I have got them from. So any questions from that one?
Yeah.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And the reason it's not depressing is we're going to talk about maturity models and talk about how you can move through it. Yes?
Was that survey done in Australia or globally?
Globally. So Lee is based in the US, and she was done it globally. Yeah. Can always ask her. So what's this maturity model thing, and why am I bringing this up? And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is that UX impact, we almost have to have this strategy of baselining our maturity, and then saying how do we want to move forward, and what are our tactical and strategic. And there are a number of models that actually help us say what this to baseline yourself and baseline the organisation and the capability. So the UX maturity model is a framework that describes the different stages of UX within the organisation. Generally, it starts with unorganised and then into leading the organisation. I will tell you there are very few organisations of which customer experience or UX are actually leading the organisation. And in everything that I've been reading and talking to people about, they've basically said we never reach stage 5. it's still an attainment. So I'm going to go through 4 different models. And the thing is, these models have been around for a while. So the first one's Jared's Full. So Jared is always interesting, he writes a lot, he does lots of interesting stuff. He has a fantastic article about how changing one button made $100 million. That's an Amazon one that he wrote up. Jeff Bezos rang him up and left a message going, dude! So go and read that article. But Jared has been working in UX or usability for a long time. So he's been thinking about this since 1997. And the way that he thinks about it is 4 stages. So from technology to features to experience to integration transparency. And this model actually sits and talks about what the users want as well as what UX focuses on and what tech focuses on. So it's an interesting model, and that's got the tech idea as well as everything else. So we're starting with get it working, we're then getting the right features, we're then getting the right experience, and lastly, it's an integrated, the product or the service are invisible. And so this is over 10 years, this is what he was coming up with. Adaptive Path did this in a bit more businessy. They wrote a paper in 2005 which was about business value and ROI. So Adaptive Path got bought, I think about 2 years ago, and moved into Capital One as their in-house UX team. But before that, they were one of the premier UX consultancies in the US. And so they actually thought about stages again, because you'll get to know that everyone's going to do these in stages, where it's 0 is intuition, so you just know and you do. There is 1 which is being informed by user behaviour. 2, it's project value. 3, business strategy, and 4, market strategy, where you're leading all of those. And so all of this comes back into this impact element. The problem with this is that it actually doesn't tell you how to do it or how to benchmark it. It is an interesting document, so the link's there if you want to go and download it and read it, because they are talking about ROI, which is something that once you start to go into some organisations, they sit there and go, well, what are you going to benefit with me and why and how? There's Jacob Nielsen, 2006. I laugh at this one, mainly because I think Jacob's a pessimist. As you will see by the numbers on the right-hand side. So, he talks about, yes, I have met Jacob, and yes, he's actually, I would consider him one of the most boring people in the world. The most interesting thing about Jacob is his coloured shirts. And he does wear, next time he ever comes to Melbourne and you find yourself maybe going to one of those things, have a look, he always wears different coloured shirts. But he starts at hostility.
He's right.
Yeah, he is right. But where I feel that the pessimism comes in is how long it takes you to move from it. So they don't want to hear about the users or their needs. We've got developer-centered, so the design team relies on its own intuition. Skunk works. How many of us have done that? So it's, Gorilla, yes, Gorilla, or external usability experts. Dedicated budget, so usability is actually planned for. Now the other thing is Jared's always going to use usability as opposed to user experience, because that's where he comes from. Managed, so someone actually thinks about it. A systematic process, so you actually start to track the user experience. And integrated, so you employ the usability data or the UX data to determine what the company should build, versus actually user-driven, so the actual data then informs what the products are. And as I said, for me, the element of pessimism comes up too. So 2 to 3 years, 2 to 3 years, 2 to 3 years, 6 to 7, 6 to 7, 20 years, 40 years to get from the start. Now, he works a lot with the big companies. So he would work with IBM, he would work with HP, he would work with those sorts of organisations, or even organisations that would be the Fortune 500. And so therefore you can see why, because it's turning people, turning humongous ship all around. And you can see why his pessimism comes in. We work in different organisations here, or many of us work in different organisations here. So the thought that we would do anything that would lay the basis for 40 years is interesting. Yeah, Zoe.
Hi Max.
Hey.
Question I want to ask is, I'm thinking, so you and I have quite a similar trajectory. Yours is much longer, deeper, richer, but we've both done a lot of our career in the UK and we came back.
Yep.
So something that I saw a lot in Britain and that I kind of see as well here is UX as tick a box.
Yes.
You know, like, so in those stages that you just showed, you had like, you've got a designated person and that's positioned on a trajectory of going upwards. Whereas I worked in places where there's a, you know, the idea of the UXer is kind of, well, we've hired one, therefore we're completely done.
We're done.
Yeah.
We have
done.
nothing else
Yeah.
we're going to do.
Not necessarily, I have not experienced that yet as being kind of as an upward part of the trajectory.
Ah.
Can you talk about, is that
Yeah, that's
or-
I think that's some of the stuff that we'll talk about.
I-
But let's focus, because we can do that. So Zoe has come up with this. Who else is dealing with that problem? Tick a box. Yeah, there's a number. Okay. So you've been brought in. Who is your ally? Who is the person who hired you? You're not quite sure, Jen. You're just going, I'm not sure. Have they gone? So, IT? Yeah. IT. Who else? IT? Marketing? Yeah, marketing. Okay.
We're customer experience, I just come from a different company, customer experience in marketing, which made no sense.
Yeah.
We were in
Not
solutions.
anymore.
So it's just, yeah, different companies not quite sure where to stick us.
That's it. And I think that comes back into that impact element, which is if they're putting you into marketing, they're putting you into product, they're putting you into IT, you're not getting a say in this. You are someone who is, you're a worker bee. And you're going to be, and that's what they think of you at the moment as a worker bee. Now there's an element, and this is what we're going to talk about when it comes to this maturity model, which is basically sitting there and going, okay, is it okay to shore up worker bee for a while and prove your worth and then start to move forward? But if you're being hired to tick a box, you need to have an ally who is that person, that stakeholder is going to help you move past, I'm going to do some wireframes and a flow because tick, to actually we can provide more impact here and work with them one-on-one. And it could be you need to prove yourself for a while to start with. But we'll talk more about that. This is the one that actually, the one I quite like. I don't know if you can see it very well. I have printed it out here. You'll get the little handout. And this one, the reason I like this one is that they actually give you the things, the aspects of the maturity for you to do an analysis upon. Come in. So the 3 bits, and we'll go through these in more detail, are timing of initial UX, availability of resources, leadership and culture. And as I said, this is the one that I'm interested in because it allows me to start to actually say, UX is not just about do I have the tools or do I have a person, but do we have influence and do we have a group and do we have the culture to do this? So I think it's a good model to actually use to measure the maturity because we're describing the level of impact it has in this model. So as I said, the timing, availability of resources, and the leadership and culture. And this is the big one for me, the leadership and culture, because it's that aspect of who's going to help this have more impact. Who do I have to work with? Are they open to the sorts of changes and things that we're going to be talking about. So when we talk about timing, it's the when. And when we start at a stage 1, there is nothing. And when we start at stage 2, there could be some, and it's usually usability testing at the end. And so it really helps to be able to say we're moving from the timing from being just a bit that's there or not there to an integral part of the strategy for the organisation. So are we always thinking about the customer, or are we always thinking about the user of the particular service or product that we're providing? And so I like to think about it as when in the development process the first method is used, and versus integration of UX within the whole product and integration of UX within the whole product lifecycle. Then there's the availability of resources. And if you are a UX team of 1 and actually go back, does everyone know that Leah Bewley wrote a book called The UX Team of 1? Yep, cool. You need to start thinking about those resources. So who does it within the organisation? And it ranges from no one to a UX team, and I may say UX team or CX team or service design team, I don't care what language you use for this, with capabilities across all of your sub-disciplines. And there are sub-disciplines, not everyone is a UX designer. There are user research people. There are people weird like me and Zoe who do information architecture. There are people who do content strategy. There are people who are visual designers within a UX team. So you've got to think about all of those. So I think about, when I use the benchmark, the type and roles of people performing UX, and then the UX methods that are being performed. So are you always just using the same method every single time? Because that's the process you know, and you're not doing the analysis to sit there and say, this project needs content strategy, and this one really is just a prototyping and usability. And actually being able to understand your project well enough to be able to understand which methods and tools and resources need to be applied so that you can actually make some impact. And then the last one here is leadership and culture. So this is what you really are responsible. If you're a UX leader, this is what you're responsible for. And I see this as influence, which is, are you a servant? And I have been in a place of being, I've been in the place where I've given up being a UXer and moved into product, because I didn't want to be a servant anymore to product. So, are you a servant to product development or creative? I was a servant to creative in an agency that I worked for in the UK. I technically reported into strategy, but the creative guys were the guys there. It was a small agency. And basically they sat there and said, no, we will do anything we want. And I got hit over the head the first time, where one of the, I think it was probably an art director, he looked at what I had been doing. We'd done the wireframes, we'd done the usability testing, we'd gone through it, and he was now applying the design. And he turned to me and said, I'm going to change all this around. And I looked at him and said, Alex, but we designed it and tested it. And he went, oh, and I went, no, it's non-negotiable. This button goes there. And that was my lesson learned, which was Alex or whoever needed to be brought into this process, and that this was nothing, I was not going to be imposing anything upon him. So the next project I worked with Alex's equivalent, Chris. And I turned to Chris and said, I've learnt my lessons when it comes to working with Alex. I want you to be part of this whole process. When we design the wireframes, you are part of the role. You will help us work out where everything is going. It was for the largest project they'd ever done, which was to do the shop for O2, which is a big mobile network. So buying phones and tariffs. Brought it in, he came into all of our workshops, all that sort of stuff. And at the end of it, we designed it together. I said, are you right, Chris? Does this make sense? He was part of it. He came back and wanted to redesign them again. And I turned to him and said, no, you have no choice. You were part of this. You were part of this as a participant. And his boss just would sit there and go, well, you know, he's the creative. I have a presence, so I had the ability to say no, and he did pay attention. So if you ever see, on my portfolio, you will see the wireframes and you'll see his designs. They are pretty darn alike. But there was a lot of me having these conversations of why? Why do you want to change all of this now after we've designed this together? So the other bit is, does it have a seat at the table? Are you actually at the same level at a GM or vice president or director role as the development manager, the product, and everyone else? Or are you, and does that then, ideally, you should be part of the planning as much as anything else? And are you scoping the products and services? Or are you receiving a brief from someone else? So ideally, that influence aspect, and this is more about you as a UX leader, you should bring that in. So this is what your team should be doing, this is what you as a leader should be doing. There's the people leadership stuff, which is the stuff that sometimes people forget, which is we need to manage, coach and develop people. If you are a UX leader, this is what we do, and we are about you leaders, we are about people, so therefore we should be doing exactly the same thing with our people. And then the actual design leadership. So thinking about inspiring, reviewing and improving the UX design of your team. Are you expected to be doing the UX design? Or are you leading the design thinking to shape your organisation? I have been in all three positions, less this one. More often, I have found myself in this position. That agency that I worked with, I did my agency time. Basically, they hired me as a head of UX. My expectation was that I would go in and I would have, and I did, I had 3 people that I would be managing, and my expectation is that I would be managing and leading and directing them. Instead, they turned to me and said, as many agencies do, we need you to be 100% billable. No. I left there after a year. I couldn't deal with it. But that's the expectation of what you, moving into that as well. What does that mean to you? And a conversation you should be having up front with whoever it is that you're having, who's hiring you. So, any questions before I go into some of my examples? I'm going to hear some war stories. Anyone who's been part of my UX world will know that I do war stories.
Yeah, I've got a few. Okay.
Go for it.
So when you don't, and you know, I read a lot of what Jakob Nielsen says, and yeah, I agree, he's got a pessimistic outlook, but quite often he doesn't actually do the UX on his audience, so it's always dev-driven environment and that type of thing. But UX as a field has kind of spread out.
Yes.
So I work in an agency environment, which is kind of probably one of the worst environments for bringing UX in. It's a challenge.
It is.
I actually quite enjoy the challenge. I relish it because it's quite easy in a sense to make a quick impact, but it's a nightmare in many senses because it's a constant uphill battle, but you know, you get the rewards and stuff from that. I guess one of my points was, you know, there's a lot of wearing hats and stuff, I suppose, involved within my particular environment, particularly when you around the are you expected to do design or just lead. But in that kind of environment, surely you have to wear those hats, right? You've got to inspire and also do the work because you wouldn't be able to otherwise, right?
Well, this comes down to what the rest of the organisation is and what they're doing. So it's basically, have you been hired as a senior UXer?
Yeah.
If you have been hired as a senior UXer, you will probably do a bit of leadership and shaping of a project, the majority of the time you're there to actually do the UX. If you are there as a head of, director of, the expectation is you might dabble and tactically do a couple of UX projects to actually get this moving and to show the value of UX within your organisation. But very quickly, ideally, you should be moving into that real leadership position of, and that's where you sit there and go, what is going to shore this up? And we're going to talk about that in some of the examples. But you really are, when it comes to your UX, of sitting there and saying, where am I? And what do I really impact? Do I want to make for me? And impact what do I want to make for the organisation? And agencies are definitely all muck in. Just get in and do it all. And that's why it works really well for young'uns, because they can get in and they have the energy to do it all. That's why you don't find as many older people, myself and Ash, still at agencies, just because you just can't do it. And you've got families and you've got the rest of it. So that's where you just sit there and talk about impact.
A question. So something interesting is so these are UX maturity models, and
yes.
and the whole thing about reporting to product and
Yes.
IT and those things. So those areas also have maturity models, and some of them would see UX reporting into them to be a sign of their maturity.
Having more reporting into them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So broadening.
So how do you deal with that, where different people believe that maturity is different areas reporting into them when you don't want to do it?
It comes down to, and I think this is where the organisation thinks of UX/CX/service design as where it belongs in the organisation. And can you make impact even if you work into product? My thing is, I had a couple when I worked as an exec producer at the BBC. I had 50 people reporting into me, 12 products. They're all IA products. I had search and I had program information, and I had some weird things like online chat. At the BBC, they would have a TV program would be shown, and then at the end of it, someone would say, and someone is available to have online chat with you right now. It's a really, really bad chat platform. People loved it, and we wanted to decommission it all the time. Somehow it came into my portfolio. And that one of the reasons was, but I was, UX all reported into product. Product was the highest. Now, I was really lucky. At certain times, I had amazing bosses. So therefore, the conversation was not about you belong to me and therefore I have more power. It was more, we're in it together. And I think that's where the element comes in of sitting there going, take away some of our ego and say, actually, how can we make this better? So, yes, going into product does mean it has low impact. But that's if you're hired as a one UXer going in. But hopefully that's the conversation you're having with whatever, if you're going into a new role, which is, who do I report to? What do I do? Let me talk to the team. How's this working? What are the problems that you see happening? Actually taking a developer out and saying, tell me a bit about how we work together. All those things we don't usually do. Where we're moving now, hiring us going into organisations and actually realising that culture is extremely important. And I don't know if I had this conversation with Naomi, but I had it with another recruiter. And I turned to them and said, at this point in time in my life, the most important thing when it comes to me going in, if I wanted to do a UX leadership role, was who am I working with, and culturally will I work with them? Are they nice adult people? And the recruiter looked at me and went, what? I said, adults. People who you would sit there and you can have a conversation with, you can have a disagreement with, you will all realise that you actually finish work at 5:30 and you can go home, that you're not expected to have stupid deadlines. Adults. She just looked at me going, okay. And that's where you have to start to think about what is the culture that you've put together for your group, and is this the right group for you? So let's go through a couple of my little war stories and then I'll get you to do some stuff. So, I've got 3 war stories. This is Argus Associates. This is where I moved. When I moved from Australia, I moved to the US, and I went working for these guys for about 18 months. The 2 things about it, Argus, the 2 guys who set up Argus wrote the Polar Bear book, so Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. And if you know Lou Rosenfeld, Lou was one of those, so Rosenfeld Media. So by chance, as opposed to by any sort of me planning it, I found myself working for these 2 guys. And the organisation, this was the height of .com. So they brought me over from Australia. They got my visa, and this was before John Howard had negotiated for good visas for Australians in the US. So we had a 6-month H1B visa wait. The big thing about this one was they were actually, they're information architects, so this is before UX as a term existed. And they were extremely organised and extremely structured. That's what you get when we, at our peak, we had 25 information architects. We had, our folder structure was beautiful. We had every process documented. We did debriefs, and we did debriefs well. We had project managers, we had the whole thing. And that's why in some ways, from our leadership and culture point of view, and the culture was amazing because they were a bunch of Midwesterners, extremely friendly, so much fun, and very down to earth. So it was a lovely place to work. Unfortunately, Lou and Peter invested in some real estate at the wrong time, and the .com bust happened, and so did we. But as an organisation, they were probably a stage 3 when I joined. So they were actually starting IA and UX activities for customers at the beginning of a project. One of the first organisations doing it. Chalice Hodge was probably doing it at the same time, and Organic, which was another agency at the time in the US. But there were very, other UX organisations, consultancies didn't exist. Availability of resources. There was most people were coming from the University of Michigan, which is why I was moved to Michigan, Ann Arbor in Michigan, because they actually were taking people from that library program and bringing them into the, and it had a HCI aspect to it as well, to do this particular work, and they started to get specialists in usability as well. So starting to really round out UX activities. And they had an amazingly strong leadership group. Samantha Bailey, who, I don't know if any of you know Sam was my boss, and I would say she's probably the best boss I've ever had. She understood how to bring teams together. So she's in a workplace, Sam became one of my best friends. Sam actually had really bad, she's had a couple of bad situations, but every time she's gone into an organisation, she has made the most amazing teams. She has that strength. So we were starting at this stage 3, and we were trying to aim for a stage 4. So I moved as a project manager. There was a team of 10 IAs, 3 project managers and a usability specialist, and the aim was to grow the consulting business. So we were hiring more people, doing more leading edge work, and this was really leading edge in 99, 2000, and developing tools that would create the cornerstone of practice. So here were my 2 tactical things that we did. So one was that we had to hire people. We were hiring people from all over the US. We got me from Australia, we got someone from Canada. And strategically, what we were trying to do was to replicate methods. So we were trying to build up processes so that we didn't have to do the wheel every time. And I think about some of those processes as some of the cornerstones of stuff I still do now. I have that all on the disk that I can get to. And then the other ones, which when I think about, and this is another Medium post I will write at one point in time, which is about leading teams. And we had 2 leading teams in there. We had a team that was a team of equals, and we had a team that was led by someone. And they were amazing teams on amazing projects. And that was all due to having a strong leadership team. Unfortunately, it all came to pieces when the dot-com bust happened, and they reduced right down. So at one point in time, the consultancy was 40, and that went down to 7 before the company folded. So the next one's the BBC. This is where I started as a stage 1 and stage 2. In 2002, I was asked to go and start up an IA team at the BBC. And the reason was they particularly wanted to create content and describe content so it could be used on multiple platforms. So they wanted to be able to use content, and this was leading stuff in 2002, because mobile, they were talking about mobile, and we were doing WAP at that point in time. Yeah. So we had multi-public, and so for us that was web, interactive TV, so actually having interactive TV and publishing to that, and to mobile, to WAP. And so our job was to try and structure and organise it so that it could go on all of those 3 different platforms. And so for us going in, what I had was I had no information architecture and actually relatively limited UX. There was one other, at the time he was deemed an information architect, so that was Matt Jones, who works for Google now. And Matt was really an interaction designer. There was no IAs. We did have a bunch of visual designers who really had no other UX experience, and we had usability professionals. There was 3 usability professionals. We had what I considered quite weak UX leadership and no IA leadership at all. And so therefore for me, we were really starting at this stage 2. So there was some basis there, but we were starting at stage 2. And my aim was really just to get us to the next level where there were some processes in there. And we did, for me, in my work, that's what I did. But I had a team then who took it to, the next levels. So people like Karen Lowsby took it to just the next level, and it became a very strong cornerstone of the UX team. Mainly, and this is, people would request the information architects to go and work with them. And they would do full UX, but the reason they did was there was a lot less ego. So these were people who were quite willing to muck in and get in and do the stuff. And that was definitely part of Karen, I would say mine and Karen's culture aspect. So from a tactical point, we had a project, we just had to show ourselves that we were doing good work, which we did. And then we realised that there were always going to be multiple CMSs. When we went in there, when I started, there was something like 30 different content management systems at the BBC. And so the realisation was that we were never going to have one to rule them all. Actually, the way we could do it is create data standards. And that has continued on. So if you know anything about information architecture, this guy named Mike Atherton who talks about it sometimes, and Mike actually took it to the next bit, to the next level, and doing domain driven design. I can see the book in front of me.
Max, could I just one thing? I also worked as an IA at BBC, but significantly later. And when I did my interview, what they made me do was do a presentation to explain domain-driven design to senior management.
Wow.
So it lasted.
Yeah, it lasted. And then the last one, and this is more, and when John and I were talking about this, we were talking about shoring up a practice, not necessarily always building up a practice. So sitting there and saying, let's not just make sure it's okay and then we can keep it sort of there, rather than sitting there and going, I have to achieve and make it to a level 4 or 5. But actually sitting there and going, what do I need to do to make this work? And the realisation is sometimes it could go down. So this was an organisation I worked for. I'll disclose that during this time I had cancer twice. So there was a real element of there was a certain limit of stuff I could do, and there was a certain amount of influence that I wasn't willing. There was certain things I was focusing on getting well, as opposed to focusing on developing this to the highest standards. But when we started, it was a really simple UX process. It was there for some projects. We had one visual designer who was not great. We had no UX leadership, so I was the first time coming in as a real UX person. So I'm saying here a stage 2, but I'm going to say between 1 and 2. And the aim, actually, I said stage 3 here, but it was sort of keeping it 2 or 3-ish. Thing is, we knew we needed to shore this up because, to be honest, I'm working with an organisation which didn't really know how to implement UX, and I was always going to have a tiny team. So the team ended up being one other UX consultant, a designer, and a front-end coder. We were shit hot. We were a good group. And these are a group of people that I continue to have conversations on LinkedIn and Facebook and the rest of it. They're the people who came to my farewell do. We were tight. Now, did we sit there and say, we rocked the world of UX? No, we did good work, and we made sure that we actually got some more good UX projects, but we didn't sit there and say we were leaders in UX in the UK. Okay. So now, it's going to be over to you. I'm really glad I only printed 30 of these. Mainly because my poor little printer. Okay. So what I want you to do is, I'm going to give you this, and there's 4 pages in it, is to mark where you are in maturity in your organisation. So let me check that out. So I've got here, so you can go through, I've given you what the maturity model is, actually sit there and say what is yours, and what do you feel your strategic impact is? And where would you like to be in 18 to 24 months?
As a business or individually?
As a UX practice. If you want to do it as an individual, just write down individual, but ideally you should think about this as a practice. And it could be you want to shore it up. It could be you want to move one level up. It could be you want to just have the option of having multiple projects to work on. Could be, I'm already a 4, I want to bring it to a 5. So, then I want you to do one tactical. So what's one thing that you could do in the next 6 months that would actually move to where you want to go? Is there a strategic project? Is there actually a project which is which would make impact for your ally? One that would actually work for a particularly good customer that you could use as a case study. And then try and do one strategic action. So is there a strategic action that you actually get onto the board of something? Or if I think back into that strategic thing that we were doing with the BBC, which was we were setting those standards. And for each of the actions, what I think will help you is how will it help you achieve your goals? Identify the people and resources you would need to do it. Who are your allies? And what do you think your potential roadblocks are to actually get that done? And this is actually the beginning of your strategy, whatever your strategy would want to be. Okay? Do it alone, or if you've got a trusted friend, you can do it with a trusted friend. And then in a group, share. And what I would like the thing to remember, this is the cone of silence here. We are sharing stuff. So there is the cone of silence. Are you all old enough to know the cone of silence? Get smart. Remember when it used to come down? You couldn't hear anything from the cone of silence. The thing about UX and all that we're doing here is this actually could be quite strategic. So if anything's shared, please don't talk about it unless someone gives you permission.
You turn streaming off now as well.
Yeah.
The cone comes down.
Cool. All right.